encouraged and blessed by Matt and by all of you. So tonight, I'd like to start with just kind of painting a picture for you. Go back in time and go back to Germany in the first half of the 20th century. The year is 1942. The Nazis have been in power for 10 years, and now they are at the culmination of what was called the final solution, where they were systematically exterminating the Jewish population along with some others who were not considered worthy of being a part of the superior race. This was a very real thing that happened, where people were being killed, grouped into death camps and killed. At that time, in Germany, there were people who acknowledged what was going on and took action in resisting it. And those people are heroes today. I would say most of the German population did not assist and did not resist. They were indifferent. But the reality is people were being murdered. And some people took action. And so what I would submit to you, just as there was heroes back then, Corrie ten Boom, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Schindler, you've probably seen the movie or heard of it, who resisted that and who we look up to as who did the right thing. I would say we are right now engaged in a very real conflict with an evil and vindictive ruler who is after people and trying to kill them. And so what I want to share with you tonight is what it looks like to be aware of that and to be engaged in that fight that is happening today. So what I'm sharing with you tonight is called the Counsel for War. I've got a few passages just to kind of set up what I'm going to be sharing, and then, or I should say a few verses to set it up, and then two parallel passages that we're going to dig into to see what could take you out of the fight and what we need to be aware of. So if I can get a few volunteers, the first verse that I'd like you to look up is Ephesians 6:12. Kevin, thank you. The next one is John 17:15. Awesome, thank you, Christian. And then Acts 26:17 through 18. Seth, thank you. And I'm going to write those up on the board while you guys are flipping there. All right, Kevin, you want to start off with Ephesians?
Ephesians 6:12. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms.
Thanks, Kevin. So what I want you to take away from this is that there is a fight. There is a struggle. It's going on. It was going on when Paul wrote this to the church at Ephesus, and it's still going on today. We have a real enemy, and that enemy is not flesh and blood. It is not people. People are not the enemy. As terrible as Hitler was, he's really not the enemy. He's actually just a pawn in this game. And so Paul does a great job of identifying this enemy is spiritual forces of evil who are waging war against us. So what I want us to take away is the fight is real. Christian, can you read John 17:15?
I do not ask that you take them out of the world, but that you keep them from the evil one.
So just to set the stage there, we have Jesus who is speaking to his disciples on the last night of his time on earth. And what he is communicating when he says this is that he recognizes there's a real enemy that's going to be attacking his men. After he leaves, they are in danger, and that the threat is something that he wants to acknowledge and mitigate by praying to the Father in this high priestly prayer in John 17. And so Jesus recognizes this threat and takes action to mitigate it. So if Jesus thought it was a real concern, I think I should consider it a real concern too. So from this verse, I want us to take away that Jesus recognized the enemy. Okay, and then Seth, if I can get you to read Acts 26, 17 and 18.
Yep. Rescuing you from the Jewish people and from the Gentiles, to whom I am sending you, to open their eyes so that they may turn from darkness to light and from the dominion of Satan to God, that they may receive forgiveness of sins and inheritance among those who have been sanctified by faith in me.
Thanks, Seth. So that is just a snippet of a speech that Paul is giving as he is sharing his testimony before King Agrippa. And so it's kind of awkward because we jump in like mid-thought. But what I want us to take away from that is that Paul is recounting this mission he received from Jesus. And that was to go to the Gentiles. He was sent to the Gentiles, and he was sent to open their eyes, and in opening their eyes, turn them from the power of Satan to the power of God. So the people that Paul was going to, they were under the power of Satan. And by sharing the truth, the light of the truth, and opening their eyes, they were going to have an opportunity to escape that power. So if we just pause for a second and consider the weight of that here this mission of taking people out from the power of Satan and bringing them under the power of God has been delegated down to us, to God's people. That's huge. You think about rescuing a Jew who was headed to a concentration camp, rescuing them from the power of Hitler and to, the Allied forces. Like, that's a pretty, whoa, give you goosebumps, amazing, beautiful picture. This is 100,000 times, multiply that to rescuing someone from Satan and from an eternal destruction and bringing them to the power of God. And that's been delegated down to people. So what I want to take away from this is that we are to implement the rescue. All right, so now that's just kind of setting the stage, and what I want to look at is two passages. The first one is in Deuteronomy chapter 20. It's 9 verses. If I can get a volunteer to look at Deuteronomy 20, verse 1 through 9. Andrew, thank you. And then if I can get another volunteer to look at Luke chapter 14, verse 15 through 20. Amy, thank you. Luke 14, 15 through 20. This first passage is counsel to the leaders of Israel in ancient Israel before they were going to go to war on who they were going to bring. So, Andrew, whenever you get there, go ahead and start reading.
When you go out to war against your enemies and see horses and chariots and an army larger than your own, you shall not be afraid of them, for the Lord your God is with you, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. And when you draw near to the battle, the priest shall come forward and speak to the people, and shall say to them, Hear, O Israel, today you are drawing near for battle against your enemies. Let not your heart faint. Do not fear or panic or be in dread of them, for the Lord your God is he who goes with you to fight for you against your enemies, to give you the victory. Then the officers shall speak to the people, saying, Is there any man who has built a new house and has not dedicated it? Let him go back to his house, lest he die in the battle, and another man dedicate it. And is there any man who has planted a vineyard and has not yet enjoyed its fruit? Let him go back to his house, lest he die in the battle, and another man enjoy its fruit. And is there any man who has betrothed a wife and has not taken her? Let him go back to his house, lest he die in the battle, and another man take her. And the officers shall speak further to the people and say, Is there any man who is fearful and faint-hearted? Let him go back to his house, lest he make the heart of his fellows melt like his own. And when the officers have finished speaking to the people, then commanders shall be appointed at the head of the people.
Thanks, Andrew. So here we see when Israel's going out to fight, a critical part of being successful in that fight is identifying who the right people are to bring to the fight. Not everyone was fit to contribute to the fight. And so a few things before we dive into the 4 excluders that I just want to highlight. Verse 1, it says when you go out to war. It wasn't if, but when. So they knew there were going to be a people who would go to war. And I think that applies today. Verse 2, when you draw near to the battle, the priest shall come forward and speak to the people. I'm not going to really dive into this, but there's a really cool parallel here in Hebrews where Jesus is identified as our high priest. And I think that's in there for a reason. It's a foreshadow of Jesus' part to play in leading us in this battle. Verse 3, it says that when you go out to battle, do not fear or panic or be in dread of them. You don't fear or dread or panic when you encounter something simple and easy. So all that's to say, the fight, the obstacle, it was too big for them. When Israel goes to war, we see they're usually outnumbered. And the odds are usually against them. God makes it clear in Deuteronomy, he did not choose Israel because they were the most numerous. In fact, they were really the smallest, and they were kind of the underdog. But they went against bigger and greater nations and defeated them by the power of God. So the job was too big for them to do on their own. So just a few thoughts. But what I do want to get into is these excluders. And before I start identifying these, I just want to say these, in and of themselves, are not sinful. They're not something to be ashamed of. These are all things that we already have in our life, most likely. And where the problem comes in is if they take priority over seeking first the kingdom. Matt shared Matthew 6:33. Seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. So when we seek these things and they take priority over engaging in this fight that God has us, they become a problem and they exclude us from the fight. So verse 5 says, Then the officers shall speak to the people, saying, Is there any man who has built a new house and has not dedicated it? Let him go back to his house, lest he die in the battle, and another man dedicate it. Here we see he gets this new house, more concerned with the new house than the fight. And so really, I categorize this as possessions. And this is verse 5. So, possessions. We all have possessions, and we are called to be a good steward of the things that God has given to us, maintain our things, our house, our car. If we don't do that, I would say that's not right either. But if those things and those possessions become first and foremost, and the maintenance of those things are what consumes us, I think it's taking us out of the fight. Verse 6, And is there any man who has planted a vineyard and has not enjoyed its fruit? Let him go back to his house, lest he die in the battle, and another man enjoy its fruit. So here we see the vineyard. Now, the vineyard was really an implement or a instrument of business. That's how they were going to make their money. And so that's a pretty big business investment to get a new vineyard. So really this comes down to their career. And this is verse 6. Now, when I was in the Army active duty, I tried to encourage guys to put career in perspective of if you're a dirtbag at work, nobody wants to know more about your life. So the call is not to sham out for the kingdom. But at the same time, if you are consumed by that, not only are you not physically available to invest into others, but you're also hurting the people around you, whether it be peers, subordinates, when they are going to get sucked in as well. If you've been in a command where the commander doesn't understand that people need personal time, everyone suffers. So I think it's true really at any level. When we give ourselves to the career with no boundaries and dedicate everything for that, and success in the career is first, we are taken out of the fight. Verse 7, and is there any man who has betrothed a wife and has not taken her? Let him go back to his house, lest he die in the battle and another man take her. And here, this one's pretty clear. I would say a relationship is what is keeping them out of the fight. That could be a wife, a husband, a boyfriend, a girlfriend, or it could just be, a family relationship where you are, over prioritizing the desires of your parents, or the desire of, an aunt, an uncle, a sibling, or something. But typically, I would say it's going to be that significant other. So here, the new wife in verse 7 shows that a relationship can take you out of the fight. And you can probably see the theme of all of these things are things God gives us to be a steward of and to do well. But when first, they make us combat ineffective. Verse 8, and the officer shall speak further to the people and say, is there any man who is fearful and faint-hearted? Let him go back to his house, lest he make the heart of his fellows melt like his own. And so here we see those who didn't believe that God was able to do this thing. They were faint-hearted and overcome by fear and fed that fear. That fear is going to be infectious. And here, I would say, it's not necessarily that fear is a good thing, but it's just a reality. We are going to be afraid. We are going to be anxious when we encounter the fight. And if we allow that to consume us, it's going to make us combat ineffective. But if in the face of fear, we persevere and trust and have faith, then we're going to be able to be victorious. So here, fear, or I kind of clumped it in with apathy. Fear or apathy. Sorry, as I get lower, my handwriting is even worse. All right, so you might be thinking, okay, you just gave us a passage from ancient Israel going to war. Does that actually apply to us today? Or was that just a way that Israel fought battles? I would say that we see these same elements come up when Jesus is describing excluders to the kingdom of God. And so who did I have? Amy, if you could read Luke 14, 15 through 20, that'd be great.
And one of those at the table with him heard this. He said to Jesus, "Blessed is the one who will eat at the feast in the kingdom of God." Jesus replied, "A certain man was preparing a great banquet and invited many guests. At the time of the banquet, he sent his servant to tell those who had been invited, 'Come, for everything is ready now.' But they all alike began to make excuses. The first said, 'I have just bought a field, and I must go and see it. Please excuse me.' Another said, 'I have just bought 5 yoke of oxen, and I'm on my way to try them out. Please excuse me.' Still another said, 'I just got married, so I can't come.'"
Thank you. And then if you read through the end of it, 21 through 24, those who declined the invitation were obviously not invited into the banquet. And this is in the context of the banquet being the kingdom of God. So I didn't want to read the whole section just for the sake of time, but here we see these same things are coming up. So verse 18, they've got a new field, possessions. Verse 19, this farmer's going out, checking out some oxen, who's going to help him, do a better job in plowing his fields. That's going to be a moneymaker. career is coming up as an obstacle once again. And then verse 20, and another said, I have married a wife, and therefore I cannot come. A relationship has kept them from entering into the kingdom. So, when we consider this, and we consider that there is an actual war being waged, and lives are at stake, and we are able to be a part of that fight or not, and that there are certain elements of our life that can keep us from doing that if prioritized over the kingdom and over the mission that we've been entrusted with to rescue people from the power of Satan to the power of God. When we consider those things, what I would ask of you is to really reflect. When you think about some of these excluders that are identified, do you see any of those as being first and foremost in your life? And is that something that is preventing you from taking part of a real mission that we've been entrusted with? So, question number 1, are you aware of the present war? Number 2, are you engaged in the fight? And then, question number 3, has something taken you out of the fight? And just to put this in perspective, what I didn't share is, how do you fight? How do you rescue? Just defining the scope of what I shared tonight. But really, what this is it's an urgent call to join the ranks. We are outnumbered. We need good people to help. So, I encourage you to consider the fight, consider the enemy, and how you can be engaged. That's everything I got. Thanks, guys.